A little bit fresher in Scotland and Northern Ireland, here of around 16 or 17 Celsius. Now, the outlook for the rest of Europe shows a large area of high pressure building across the continent. That's basically going to allow the warm air to spread all the way to eastern parts of Europe. There will be a bit of a blip because this weather front will introduce temporarily some slightly fresher air to some parts of Europe, but I think overall it's going to stay on the warm side. Let's have a look at a snapshot then for some of our cities into the week ahead, and generally speaking, really quite warm.
You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah,
I
you
sit
are
in
a
Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
You are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Margaret Atwood, welcome to This Cultural Life. Some of the world's leading artistic figures reveal to me their influences.
Music is part of our culture, dance is part of our culture.
And the experiences that have inspired their own work.
The people around me never said you can't do this.
I was totally in love with Monk.
Now I'm blushing. Find out what fires the creative imagination with John Wilson. This Cultural Life, tomorrow at 4:30 on BBC News and iPlayer.
Hey, I'm Julia with the catch-up. A 14-year-old girl and a coach driver have died after their school bus overturned on the M53 in Merseyside. Police say that 58 people were involved. A 14-year-old boy also suffered life-changing injuries. Pupils at the schools are getting special support. Some other stories now. From Sunday, a new law will ban shops and takeaways from selling single-use plastic like cutlery and polystyrene cups. The thing is, some businesses are saying they had no idea about the ban and haven't prepared at all. Facing financial stress, more than half of uni students are balancing their studies with paid jobs. The Higher Education Policy Institute, which did the research, is worried it makes inequalities between students worse. People born using sperm or egg donors in the UK who turn 18 after Sunday will now be able to find out who their donor is. It's because of a law from 2005. Matthew and Phoebe were conceived via sperm donor. They've known since they were 2, but only the bare minimum.
His height, his builds, eye colour, hair colour, age, some of his hobbies.
So when we have a conversation at home, he's usually referred to as the Colombian guy or just other dad.
And we'll leave you with 10 seconds of pioneering pipes. Yes, thanks to her TikTok fame, Royal Albert Hall organist Anna Lapwood has given the instrument a whole new fan base, and now she's releasing an album. You're all caught up now. See ya.
How should one TV channel cover the troubles of another TV channel? Welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. Coming up, GB News is under fire over offensive comments made on air, but was Newsnight fair to the channel in the way it covered it on Wednesday? And why were BBC One viewers treated to some of a 2017 edition of Newswatch last weekend? First, has Brexit disappeared from the public discourse? For many people, the decision to leave the UK is now history and the country has moved on, but for others, it's still very much a live issue, as was reported on Saturday afternoon on the News Channel.
Pro-European protesters are marching in central London today. The National Rejoin March is due to culminate with a rally at Parliament Square. They want the prospect of Britain rejoining the European Union back on the political agenda.
But that 20 seconds or so was pretty much the limit of BBC television reporting of the National Rejoin March, which did not feature on BBC One's news bulletins. As well as the thousands in the streets of central London on Saturday, hundreds of others then contacted the BBC to complain about what they saw as insufficient coverage of the event. One of them was Sue Barnard, who recorded this video for us.
This march was covered by various foreign news channels and also various UK and international newspapers. Who made the decision not to cover it, and why not? Has there been a deliberate decision to downplay the effect of Brexit on the lives of everyday people? Or is it more sinister than that? Is the BBC under instruction not to broadcast anything which could be critical of the government? I'd like some answers, please.
Well, this was the statement issued in response. BBC News is unable to cover every march or protest that takes place. The decision on which stories to cover are taken on editorial merit, with a number of factors considered, including the day's news agenda and whether the subject of the march is a particularly newsworthy or topical issue. We regularly, and will continue to, represent a range of views on the EU and Brexit, examining and analysing the impact of the UK's decision to leave. Perhaps to the BBC's relief, another news broadcasting organisation has been in the spotlight this week, GB News, who have suspended contributor Laurence Fox and presenter Dan Wootton after what the channel themselves called unacceptable on-air comments by Fox about a female journalist, which they said were insufficiently challenged by the presenter. The channel was the subject of a discussion on Wednesday's Newsnight on BBC Two.
These are Poundland Fox News channels, these right-wing channels. What you do is you shock and awe, and that's what this is about.
Frankly, what Ofcom should do is shut it down, like it shut down RT.
And I actually agree with Adam. I think it should be taken off air. It was entirely predictable that Laurence Fox was going to come out with a statement that was that offensive.
The political blogger known as Guido Fawkes invited his followers to complain to the regulator Ofcom about what he called Newsnight's extreme, unbalanced coverage of GB News, arguing that impartiality rules had been breached. One viewer, known on X as Gary Foxtrot Vet, followed their advice and submitted an Ofcom complaint. He wrote, BBC Newsnight hosted Adam Bolton and Caroline Noakes, who both called for GB News to be taken off air because Laurence Fox was rude. This is a flagrant violation of free speech. Well, the reason why there was some unanimity among the panel could be explained by what presenter Victoria Derbyshire said at the start of the discussion.
We did ask for an interview with the boss of GB News. He said he couldn't come on until he'd completed his investigation.
Later in the week, that boss, Angelos Frangopoulos, told Radio 4's Today programme that he was appalled by the remarks made by Laurence Fox. Fox himself apologised, and Ofcom launched an investigation into whether the GB News broadcast had broken its rules on offence. Let's talk now to the editor of Newsnight, Stuart McLean. Thanks for coming on Newsnight. So, three voices, no one giving the GB point of view, GB News point of view. Shouldn't you have got someone?
Well, I think the starting point is that we would always seek to ensure that every discussion we do on a live issue like this is as balanced as possible, with a range of voices. And as your clip showed, Victoria was very clear on the programme that we did invite GB News to appear on the programme, and we understood that at the time they were unable to because they were conducting an investigation into some of their on-screen talent. You could have got someone else
who would have expressed their point of view.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have a production team at Newsnight who spend many hours a day working to find guests from across a range of views, and we tried many people who used to work for GB News, many others who might be sympathetic to GB News, and unfortunately on Wednesday we weren't able to find anyone who could come on. I do think it's worth saying we don't get everything right all the time. I mean, I've watched back the discussion and quite happy to accept that discussion would have been better, and had we had that range of views and had we had a robust defender of GB News. I'm sure your viewers will understand that when we're putting out live news programmes, two things are true. One is you never quite know the direction in which any discussion might go once you're on air. And the second thing is, it's often very hard to pin down guests, particularly for a late night news programme, who are available and able to come on. So not every item can be absolutely perfect. We strive for total balance and to bring in as wide a range of views as possible at every time. And that's really our guiding principle, every programme we make. As we saw on Wednesday, we don't always hit that mark. It's not for lack of trying, ever, but when we don't quite get it right, it's important that we acknowledge that we haven't.
That's very much appreciated. Why didn't you ask Lawrence Fox?
So, at the time of our broadcast on Wednesday, Lawrence Fox had made it very clear that he wasn't prepared to apologise for what he'd said, and that he was questioning the motives of media organisations that were covering the programme. So on that occasion, he wasn't somebody who we invited onto the programme. We did invite many other people who worked at GB News, including Dan Wootton and the station's boss, Angelos Frangipoulos, none of whom were able to come on. But I assure you, we did invite a whole number of people who would speak in favour of the channel, but given the difficulties at the time, none of them were available to come on.
And you could have asked Lawrence Fox and pre-recorded him and then made a decision.
Well, Lawrence Fox had been very clear in the course of that day on his social media that he wasn't prepared to do any pre-recorded interviews and would only do live interviews, so that wasn't an option.
OK. Did you have a discussion with more senior editorial figures at the BBC about whether it was OK to go ahead without that missing point of view, which, as you said, would have made for a better discussion?
No, we didn't, and the BBC doesn't often work in that way. I mean, the discussion, it's worth saying, wasn't just about GB News. It was a broader discussion with three very well-informed people who know a lot about the broadcasting landscape, and although the discussion started focusing on GB News, it was broader in scope, and we were talking about the regulatory environment, and each of those people on the panel had a lot of experience in the area. So although we didn't have anyone who was on there representing GB News, there were a range of views on there, including a Conservative MP.
We often get complaints that programmes like Newsnight are obsessed with talking about the media. And given that you didn't have all the sides, perhaps there's a question about, was it justified to give so much discussion time? There are people who just think you're always just talking about yourselves in some way.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that's a fair critique. A programme like Newsnight generally covers 2 or 3 stories in depth every night. We actually led our programme on Wednesday with a very long film from the front line in Ukraine, and we've done a lot of coverage of foreign news all this week. I think on Wednesday, the row about GB News, and for us, the broader questions that it raised around broadcasting in the UK and some of the rules around that, was one of the hot topics for discussion, and I think it's perfectly relevant area for us to explore.
Stuart McLean, thank you so much for coming on Newswatch. It's really appreciated.
You're welcome.
Finally, when things go wrong somewhere on BBC News, we sometimes feature those moments on Newswatch if they've elicited complaints or comments from you. So it's only fair that when there's a problem with Newswatch itself, we should highlight that too and explain what happened. So let's have a look then at last Saturday's transmission of the programme on BBC One as part of breakfast. Hello and welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. How does the BBC source and verify the flood of user-generated content it gets after a terrorist attack or a natural disaster? Regular viewers will immediately have spotted that that's not our current studio or title sequence, and irregular ones won't have taken much longer to realise that a clip of Home Secretary Amber Rudd speaking to Andrew Marr meant this was an old edition of Newswatch. Exactly 6 years old, in fact, originally shown on the 22nd of September 2017. Human error meant that similarly dated edition was played instead of last week's programme, which had already gone out correctly in our 11:30 p.m. slot on Friday evening on the news channel. Mark Powlett posted this. The fact that BBC Breakfast accidentally showed an old episode of Newswatch this morning means that people who complain to Newswatch about news will complain about this to Newswatch, and I think the universe may implode. Maggie's human was similarly troubled. Slow brain this morning. Hang on, she's not in government anymore. That's the old set. Andrew Marr doesn't have that show anymore. And Annette Glazer smelled a conspiracy. Newswatch wasn't shown on BBC Breakfast today. Was this sabotage because it was about Russell Brand? Instead, they started showing an old episode, then stopped it. What's going on? Well, yes, the old edition was pulled off air after a couple of minutes when the mistake was realised, and the right version appeared on Sunday's Breakfast instead. So no sabotage, Annette. Our apologies for the error. We've taken steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. And just a reminder that we are always watchable on the BBC iPlayer, where you can catch up on that edition about the coverage of Russell Brand, if you missed it, and any edition from the whole of the past year. Let's just hope you're watching the correct programme right now. Thank you for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions about what you see or hear on BBC News, on TV, radio, online and social media, email newswatch@bbc.co.uk, or you can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, @NewsWatchBBC. You can call us on 0370 010 6676 and do have a look at previous interviews on our website, bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us for now. Thank you for joining us. Do think about getting in touch and perhaps even coming on the programme. We'll be back to hear more of your thoughts about how the BBC covers the news next week. Goodbye.
This is BBC News. We'll have the headlines for you at the top of the hour, which is straight after this programme.
You know how it is, you're filming a standard street scene, there are people milling about, it's a